Hey everybody. Decided to start the show a minute or two earlier than normal. I want to thank everybody for tuning in to another episode of the Paranormal Fireside Chats with the Naked Bigfoot. I am, of course, the Naked Bigfoot. Before we begin tonight's tale, just a few words of caution and warning. Um, Sorry, I'm not completely with it tonight, so there will be some awkward pauses throughout the talk tonight. Plus, if you can't hear me that well, please let me know too. My voice is not in the best of shape either, but the show must go on. Few words of caution. The views here um, the views, viewpoints, and opinions of your that are expressed tonight are of mine and no one else's. I am not here to persuade, dissuade, anger, upset, or confuse anyone. I'm here to entertain and to teach. Hopefully, you'll leave tonight with a little bit more knowledge, um, and hopefully, I plant the seed of curiosity for people to go forth and discover the wonders that this world has to offer, as I have. Also, there will be I will be talking there will I will be discussing a bit of historical nonfiction tonight. It will be graphic. It may upset some people, um, but it is pertinent to the tale that I'll be telling tonight. I will also, no doubt, be dropping the F bomb here and there, and maybe saying shit as well. So if there's anybody out there who is sensitive to foul language or to graphic imagery, even if it's being woven by the spoken word, then maybe tonight's show is not for you. Or if you have small children in the room and you don't wish to expose them to such things, please ask them to leave the room now. You've been warned. So, on with tonight's show. I've been told already that a lot of people have been looking forward to the tale of the Crow Man. Um, it's it truly is as ominous as it sounds. Uh, um, but I'll start off by uh, defining a few things first. There are very few urban legends, stories, legends, supernatural tales, and especially in the Deep South, that are shared in states and localities. Um, but there are a number that are shared between states and localities, and they go by the same name. Um, for instance, tonight's story, speaking of a supernatural being, and that's what he's going to be called, the Crowman. You can find uh, similar stories. I mean, seriously, similar stories. They're all pretty much in between 89 and 99% identical. Between uh, counties and parishes in Louisiana, Alabama, Mississippi, Georgia, Arkansas. Um, there are so many localities that share common tales of the Crowman. Um, they all describe him pretty much the same way. Uh, he, well, should I tell you the description now, or should I continue with my definitions tonight? Let me continue with my definitions, okay, before I forget them. Because there's a good chance I will forget a few things, so please bear with me. Uh, In a previous Paranormal Fireside chat, you may remember, for anybody who saw it, I discussed the idea of, we were talking about hauntings in general, and I was talking with people in the chat about something called a Gestalt haunting, where a number of bits and pieces of supernatural energy will gather together to create a haunting, a being that a haunting situation. That's called a gestalt. Now, gestalt is a term used in psychology. The definition, and please forgive me if I screw it up a little bit. The definition of what gestalt is: a gestalt is defined as an organized whole. That's WHOLE, whole, like whole, being, that is greater than the sum of its parts. In the case of the Crowman, as I researched him and tried to track him down, which back in the day I was not very bright, so I always looked for the dangerous things to go try to find out about and track down. But that's oh, the drinking game. I almost said it without telling you about the drinking game. Real quick, drinking game tonight. Anytime you hear me say that's a story for another time, or that's a story for another day, take a sip of your adult beverage or your Kool-Aid or whatever it is you're drinking tonight, your tea. I will say it a lot. If you do drink an adult beverage, please do not drink and drive, because I'm pretty damn sure you're going to be fucking wasted by the time the show's over with tonight, because I will say that phrase a lot. As I was saying, the Crowman is a gestalt, supernatural being. And I'm going to continue to call him he until I describe him to you. You'll see why I call him a he. Oh, HMC, welcome, dude. I don't think you've ever been in the room where you've heard me talk about the drinking game. So, hey, Christine, good to see you too. Thanks for joining in tonight. Anybody else I haven't said hi tonight? Hi to everybody. Super hard show. Chris at Bald and Bonkers, all of you guys, thank you for coming on tonight. I really do appreciate your support tonight. As I was saying, the Crowman is something that is found in the tales and legends in a great many of the states in the Deep South. He is a gestalt supernatural being, meaning that he is one being that is composed of the anguish. He's composed of heightened emotions, such things as fear, anguish, anger, rage, very powerful negative emotions that, emotions give off a certain amount of energy, as everybody may or may not know that, which some things in the paranormal and supernatural world can actually pick up on, and actually can use that energy to communicate back with you. Well, with a Gestalt being, these energies gather in one place. And we're not talking about 5 or 6 people that are pissed off that creates this. We're talking about entire cities that are in a state of true fear, or true anguish, or true rage. It has to be the primal forms of these emotions that creates, that releases this energy that gathers, and that gave birth to this being that is known as the Crowman. He is, like I said, he is a whole that is greater than his individual parts. Now, saying that, you heard me talk about Gestalt hauntings before. Not all Gestalt beings or Gestalt hauntings are intelligent at all. It is a very rare thing for a Gestalt paranormal being or paranormal or haunting to become self-aware. But it does happen. But it's very rare. And in this case, the the Crow Man is self-aware. Um, he knows what he is. He's driven by the purpose that came to him. The purpose being, um, I don't want to use the word punish, but he's created from so many negative emotions. He was created from so many negative emotions. Um, that the things that he does, and I'll get into that soon, the things that he does, um, trust me, they're not positive. He's not Miss Mary Sunshine. You gotta trust me on that. He's not Miss Mary Sunshine. He doesn't ride rainbows and unicorns at all. He doesn't, give people birthday cakes or bake muffins for them and leave them outside their doors at night. He ain't that type of critter. But how can something like him exist in so many towns, so many locations, so many communities, and so many people know his name? Um, the earliest, and I believe, now this is based on my research now, based on the research I did many moons ago, and the notes that I took in my journals when I went back and reviewed them about this. I think I found the origin, the creation point, the 0 point where he would the absolute time that he came into being for the very first time, when the world gave birth to him, and he came into a being and became self-aware and began his purpose, purpose for existing. Now we're going to go back into history for a little bit. We're going to be talking about the South, and I will be now from here on out. I'm going to be giving everybody, this is actual history, okay? The events I'm about to discuss is something that actually happened, okay? And it was bloody. And it was done during a time in which the South is, and a lot of Southerners are not proud of, during a time of great evil that happened. I'm not apologizing for it. This is history. And if we forget history and refuse to discuss history in the context in which it was done in, no matter how gruesome or inhumane that time may have been, we lose something of ourselves as a people by doing that, by ignoring history like this. So, sorry. It was 1887. This was not long after the Civil War ended. It took place in Thibodaux, Louisiana. Hopefully I'll have more to deliver. It took place in Thibodaux in 1887, in Thibodaux, Louisiana, at a sugarcane plantation, or former plantation. It was a sugarcane farm. Thibodaux was known for sugarcane and sugar production during that time. Um, it was during the time, it was after the slaves had been freed at the end of the Civil War. A lot of the African Americans in the South chose to continue to work on some of the farms on which they were enslaved on, but they would work, but they would get paid. Now they would not be, they would not no longer be under the yoke of a master, so to speak. They would be attending, you know, they'd be doing the things that a day laborer would normally do, and there was. In Thibodaux, there was a very large population of African American, I'm going to call them day laborers who worked the sugarcane fields, and they were being paid. They were being paid a lot less, of course, than your typical white worker at the time. And most of them took notice of this, and were spreading throughout the town and throughout the community and throughout the former plantations, which were now farms. Known as farms instead of being called plantations. Uh, and a lot of these former slaves gathered together to protest not being paid as much. They wanted more pay for the job that they did because they would work 12-hour days and get paid pennies for the entire week. And it wasn't enough for them to live on because now they were now a part of society and they had to pay their way through society. But the people who employed them were not paying them to do so, enough to do so. So these rumblings kept going on, and more sugarcane farms, the workers at more sugarcane farms, they started to gather and to talk, and they decided to have a very large protest at one of the largest sugarcane plantations, former plantations, in Thibodeau at the time. And on November 23rd, 1887 is when they did it. And they were I'm saying pretty peaceful. They were loud, by all accounts, by all witnesses, by written witnesses, but from both sides. That they were loud, of course. They were protesting and, not being paid for doing the work. Not being paid enough for doing, I mean, I don't know how many people on tonight or who will view this video if you've never been to the sugarcane fields. When I lived in Hawaii and on Maui and many of the islands there that do a lot of farming and do a lot of sugarcane growing, I've sat on the hills and looked down. I mean, it's backbreaking labor, burning the fields and then cutting the sugarcane and harvesting it. It's incredibly labor intensive to create sugar. Once it's been harvested, it's insane. It's absolutely insane. So I can understand what was going through. Um, yeah, heavy metal. I used to love getting fresh sugarcane and chewing on it. It was so good, and sucking on it, it's so good. That was such a treat. Um, and it still is a treat for those who can get their hands on it. It's like gold in some locations. People don't want to let you have it. Make you pay out your ass for it, one of the two. So on November 23rd, 1887, and of course, for those who don't know, sugarcane actually belongs to the grass family and is also closely related. It's a type of bamboo, sugarcane is, for those who don't know. Sugarcane is actually a type of bamboo that can be very invasive if you're not careful. If you try to grow it on your farms or grow it in your greenhouse. And I'm not saying that I didn't do that because, but that's a story for another day. But yes, I did try to grow it in the greenhouse one time with some seeds that I ferreted away. And that shit went everywhere. But it was fun. Um, oh, I know, Christine. I'm full of so many useless facts. I know. Just not about the paranormal, but about the world in general. But on November 23rd, 1887, the workers, a lot of the men from the town, Thibodaux, Louisiana, went out to the farm where the protest was happening, armed with guns, and they decided to break up the protest by shooting everyone. Again, this is an actual true story in history. You can look it up. It's called the Thibodaux Massacre of 1887. Um, it's not talked about much, but it's out there. And they killed 60, 60 African Americans. They killed 60 people out there. And everybody ran for their lives as this was happening, of course, but they did kill 60 people. And one of the more interesting things that you'll find on sugarcane farms is that they have dug irrigation trenches and canals throughout the property to bring water into the sugarcane. And they took these 60 bodies and they put them in the canal and they buried them in the canal in a mass grave in the canal. Um, and then went about their business afterwards. Like, that was the beginning and end of that protest at the time. It was one of the seldom talked about incidents in our history that I think more people should probably know about. It was this anger, this fear, um, from all of this death, this anguish, this mourning that happened. That 13 days after the massacre was the first time that someone first saw the Crowman walking the streets at midnight in Thibodaux, Louisiana. Give you a short description about how he was described to me. Ooh, you're watching on TV. That's awesome. My face probably looks amazing on TV, Drew. Um, uh, it's a man, and I'm saying he's a man because he's a man. He was described as being about 7 feet to 8 feet tall. Tall. Incredibly thin. Wearing a black. It wasn't a duster the way they described it. It was the way it was told to me, as it was passed. The story has been passed down to the families. Um, I don't know how many people are familiar with oiled black canvas clothing. It used to be a thing. It was fairly inexpensive, but it was black. And it was a canvas jacket that went draped from his shoulders all the way down to around his ankles. Wore black gloves, black hat. But that's where the black ended, because the face, and when the sleeves came up on the above the gloves where you could see, his skin was the color. I don't know how familiar everybody is with seeing a freshly plucked chicken, wild chicken, not the stuff that's raised on farms. Freshly plucked chicken or a freshly plucked squab, but the skin is not white. The skin is a bluish gray color, and that's the color of the Crowman's skin. Like the skin of a bird. When you pull the feathers out of a chicken, it leaves, of course, the little puckering fuck where the follicles were at with it, the follicles, and that's what his skin looked like. They looked like freshly plucked chicken. Freshly plucked avian skin. His face was described as he had blue eyes, the bluest of blue eyes. It was blue on blue. He had dark blue irises with light blue, light blue. Well, the pupils were dark blue, the iris were lighter blue, and then the slayer of the white around it. I'm picturing him in my head, if you're wondering what I'm doing. Because I should have put that on here. It was blue on blue on blue, with the darkest blue to the lightest blue of his eyes. Everything was blue about his eyes. But with his eyebrows and his face, um, exactly hair. It was actually black feathers instead of hair, long black feathers. His eyebrows were feathers. His hair were feathers. He had a slight beard that looked like fresh feathers that were beginning to come out on a newborn chick that were coming out. His lips were icy blue. His teeth, on the other hand, he did not have individual teeth. He does not have individual teeth. When they look and you see him smile, it was a solid piece of yellow. The top and bottom rows of his teeth were solid yellow, solid pieces. And he walked with an echoing gait. And I actually had to have them describe to me what exactly that was. Whether he was walking on wood, dirt, gravel, whatever he walked on. When he put each foot with each footfall, it created an echo where no echo should be. He was seen over the course of 12 days. After the 13th day, he was born. On the 12 days after it, he walked. I know. That's how it was told to me. I know that sounds interesting. Oh, and God. His nose. He didn't have much of a nose. He had a barely perceptible nose with two tiny holes pressed against his face, but he had enough bump up here to be able to give it an almost beak-like effect. But even with that, why would you still refer to him as a crow man, you may ask? Well, he was always accompanied by 4 black birds. 1 always sat on his shoulder, and 3 followed him as he walked, flying or perching and watching as he walked. Again, the figure may seem imposing, it may seem terrifying. What was he doing besides walking, you may ask? Well, during the 12 days that he walked, he would pause in front of the houses, in front of the places, the houses where people lived that had actually conducted the massacre at the Thibodeau sugarcane farm. The people who actually pulled the triggers and killed those 60 people. And when he went there, he reached up. He would pull 1 feather from his head, and he'd leave it at the door. Or he would leave it on the windowsill, and he'd leave. When he did that, something always happened to the people that he left that feather at their house with. They would have an inordinate amount of bad luck. And I'm not talking about stubbing your toe or some shit like that. All of their livestock would die. Their children would come down with the pox and possibly die. Something horrible would happen there. Something tragic would always happen there with a visit from the Crow Man. And what was famous was that he always would frighten adults. When an adult would see him walking down the road and coming to someone's house, and seeing the crows following him, they were terrified. But he would never terrify children. Children were always strangely attracted to him. And for some reason, when he would appear in the middle of the night, the kids would wake up from their beds and they'd go look out their windows and they would see him as he was taking the feather out and placing it at the house. And they were just not scared of him. There was something about him that did not frighten children, but would utterly terrify any adult who did view him when he would come there. Again, this went on for 12 days, but the effects of his visit lasted for years after that, because the African American community there began to share the stories and hear about it. Now, he never visited any of them. The African American community, they were the victims. And in some sense, he was bringing some sense of justice for them, to these people that persecuted them and that killed them, for crying out loud. Because at the end of the 12th day, he never showed back up. He never came back to the town. But the African Americans in the town, they whispered. A lot of them had dreams of him. They had dreams of him walking from their house and going to these houses of the people that committed these crimes, this horrible atrocity upon their people. And they saw him as some type of, avenging spirit or guardian angel. Um, but that's, like I said, that was the first known instance of the Crowman. Um, that is actually documented. The stories are still told, especially in the African American community, and a lot of the stories that they pass along to their children and their children's children that pass along of the Crowman. Um, Again, their community had nothing to fear from him. But I will say this: after his visit, atrocities like what happened on that farm that day, where they killed 60 people, never happened again. Never happened again. I believe when he was created from all of that anger, rage, and anguish, that he brought a little bit of that pain to the ones who had caused pain. He came there to teach them a lesson by giving them equal amounts of pain. Um, but if you just go up and outright kill someone that committed things like this, they've never learned their lesson. They never learned why they were being killed. Um, the best lessons, and this is what I was taught many years ago, as a Hungan, a voodoo religion, uh, the best lessons that can be taught are taught to the living, so they can pass on the lessons to their children and their children's children. I will be doing a show later on about curses, and the voodoo faith, we do not refer to, as a Hungan, we do not refer to them as curses, the things we do. Um, we refer to them as lessons, to teach someone a lesson, to help them right their ways and right the wrongs that were done to them. And in this sense, this Gestalt being that came into being um, from all of this pain, I believe, had the same philosophy, that to outright kill someone does not teach a lesson, does not help someone, does not help right a wrong, a lesson that can be taught to the children and their children's children, that it may never happen again. And I believe that's what he did that night in Tibet, well, those 12 days in Thibodeau. After the 13th day, when he came into being on the 12 nights that he walked, he taught lessons that night, those nights, when he visited those houses. And he left a piece of himself behind at each one of these. Because you have to remember again, as I said before, when I defined a gestalt supernatural paranormal being, it is a single being when you see it. But fundamentally, it's made up of pieces of something else. But it's greater than the sum of those pieces. So when he left one of those feathers behind, he left a bit of pain, a bit of anger, a bit of rage, a little bit of grief that he took from himself and left at each one of these houses when he did it. And like I said earlier, the Crowman has appeared. The tales of the Crowman appeared in many other towns and many other communities in many other states, like I said, in Georgia, not just Louisiana, Georgia, Mississippi, Alabama, Arkansas. The Crowman has appeared. But you know what? It was for always the same reasons that some great wrong was done. We're not talking about, Mrs. Gulch taking the Aunt May's farm or some shit like that, trying to buy everything out or something. We're talking about fundamental evils that were done, that the Crowman had to came to teach lessons to the ones that committed these great evils. So it may never happen again in the future. Uh, I had heard about him. Again, you'll always hear me talking about Athens, Georgia. That was my base of my home base for a long time was in Athens, Georgia. I don't know how many people have ever been to Athens, Georgia, but Athens, Georgia, even today, Savannah as well, even today is a paranormal hotbed, a supernatural hotbed. There's always something there happening, not just in Savannah, but in Athens. Athens is a you'll never you'll never see it on. That is a really good point. Is conditioning energies. Um, and I'm glad you said that because I think I left something out that was really important about the Crowman and about Gestalt. Gestalt. And that's Gestalt. Gestalt. It's a German word for those who don't know. Um, that once a Gestalt is created, a Gestalt paranormal entity or a paranormal being is created, it doesn't go away. It exists forever. Um, it's drawn to like energies that created it in the first place, like a magnet. It's drawn to it. And in the case of the Crowman, he's drawn to these great evils that were committed in these various in the century communities. He's drawn to them, and the whole time coming there to bringing his cadre of crows that teach a lesson as he does it. That's a good point, judge, jury, and executioner. I think that's a. I think he's more primal than even that. Um, he's Old Testament, if you had to say that. An eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Um, he's he's become a primal force that day that he was created. And like I said, he's drawn to these acts of great evil, these great acts of evil that release all this energy, negative energy, that produce all this negative energy, that he's drawn to them. Um, and he doesn't stay, and which I found fascinating. He never stayed more than 12 days. It took him 12 days to teach the lessons that needed to be taught, um, to enact the lessons that needed to be enacted, and he left and moved on to the next one. And humanity being what humanity is, we can't avoid our nature, our violent nature, and the things that we do. That so there's never a community, there's never a time in a community where some act of evil will happen, a great act of evil that's done by a community, a group of people, um, that would not go unnoticed by him and is drawn to him. So, needless to say, he's always on the road and always walking. But he never walks during the day. The people only see him at night. Now, people have claimed to see the spots where when the sun rose, he would disappear. Like a black fog, he would just vanish. But the one thing that never vanished were the four crows that would always accompany him. They would always roost nearby the place where he vanished, because as soon as the sun went down, that would be the place that he would reappear, and they would continue their walk. Um, in Athens, Georgia, of course. That's another good point. It is rather Victorian. His ways were rather Victorian. And I try to not apply any too many moralistic judgments when it comes to creatures like this. Um, they operate on a much higher state of consciousness than I could possibly ever understand or perceive or completely deal with. Um, as it happens to be in Athens, Georgia at the time, there are lots of little towns around Athens that you can go to that are poor towns. Um, there was an instance, uh, and again, it happened to an African American family. Again, the Crowman was birthed to avenge, to bring judgment for those who wronged the African American community. I've never heard of an instance where he came to bring judgment and to bring lessons to a Chinese American or Asian American or white community or a Latino community. He always appears because that's gave birth to him. The incident that happened that gave birth to him happened to an African American community. So he's drawn to things that happen to that community, that happens to that community. Um, okay, here comes my quick warning again. 'Cause I'm about to talk about something that's hopefully won't get me kicked off YouTube. But again, it's historically accurate. I mean, the shit really happened when I was in Georgia. Um, I was looking up supernatural instances when I would read the local rags and the local papers and pick up different stories. Um, I never, you know, I didn't pay much attention to the local crime unless something, felt hinky about it that maybe had a supernatural or paranormal or preternatural leaning towards it that I would go out and investigate or go out and try to gather information about it to put in my journal and write about, maybe study and maybe learn more about it. But there was a local priest who had been molesting some of the African American girls in the community. He was a white priest in the community. They were members of the parish that were high up in the parish. Because you remember, in a lot of southern churches, there's a hierarchy. Everybody's, a lot of people have roles in the church, and a lot of people knew what he was doing, that he was molesting them, that he was raping them, and he was doing it. A lot of people knew about it. The sheriff knew about it. The town police knew about it. I swear, probably the mayor probably even knew about it too. Um, and it got so bad that the father of one of the little girls that he had molested uh, came to his Sunday service with a meat cleaver. He was going to chop off his manhood and feed it to him, and the incident came to a boil there. And that's how I found out what had been going on in the community and started being nosy and sticking my nose around. The outrage was palpable. The acts the priest committed um, were heinous and evil. But also the people who knew about it but did nothing to stop him, did nothing to deter him. Those acts were equally evil. And for 12 nights, after that blow up in the church, the outrage from the African American community, um, the Crow Man came to visit the town, came to visit Athens, Georgia. I'm not going to say I never saw him. I never saw him. I had only heard the stories of the people that did see him. But the priest, in the space of 12 days, the priest who had been doing it, um, the dear Reverend Father had been doing it, he was actually hit, um, which I thought was hilarious. He was hit by a bus. It didn't kill him. but did break both of his legs and one of his arms. And later on, once he healed up from that, he had a permanent limp. Um, it didn't heal properly. He got many infections and from the accident and everything. It never healed properly. His arm or his leg, so he never walked properly. He was always having to walk with two canes. Um, it was bad. And the higher ups that were in the parish at the time, the church parish, they were also visited by similar maladies. Um, Corn crops. One corn farmer, his cornfield caught on fire and burned it all. He grew corn for feed that he sold. He used for his dairy cows, but he also sold it to the community. His entire cornfield burned down. He got no corn. He lost tons of money. Um, and I'm not sure, but I think he actually lost the farm as well because of that. Because he relied on those crops every year to pay it all, pay everything up, so he could get through winter, and which a lot of farmers still do. They pay everything off in the fall, and throughout winter they coast until the spring and summer, where they can start to raise their crops again and catch up on their bills again in the fall. Well, he couldn't do that when that happened. But a lot of people had some incredibly tragic bad luck. It all befell white people. It all befell people that were acquainted um, with that priest in one more form or another. I saw some of the little girls because I always love to visit Baptist churches. I still do like to go to Baptist churches, especially Southern Baptist churches. They're a lot of fun to go to. Um, Nothing's more lively and energetic than a Southern Baptist church. It's a blast. Um, I was sitting in the pew in the back, of course. I was the only white person in that particular church at that time. And as I was looking around at all the little kids that were behaving themselves, of course, while the services were going on, I noticed that a lot of them were holding black feathers. Um, I thought they were chicken feathers when I first saw them, um, which of course piqued my curiosity. So at the end of the service, when everybody gathered to gossip, because that's what you did at the end of the service, you always gathered around to gossip. I went around, and the people who didn't know me, I introduced myself, and come to find out, a lot of them did know me because I was the talk of the town. Come to find out, I was called the sneak and the prior of the town. I would always put my nose into stuff I didn't belong in. I was a one-man Scooby gang, and except for I was very annoying at the time. But that's a story for another day. I wish y'all could hear that. I have Gozer at my door. I'm not Gozer is my Siamese cat. I'm not letting her in because she's psychotic for some reason today, and she sounds like she's eating through the fucking door right now, trying to get to me. Um, she's so pissed off at me right now, so I won't let her in. Um, well, they never chased me out of town. Um, a few people. I was threatened a few times with guns and a baseball bat at one point, but that's a story for another time. But you're right, heavy metal. For the most part, they put up with me and my nosiness. And of course, I started asking about the feathers, and they told me, no, that's not a chicken feather. That's a crow's feather. Um, I said, really? But that's all the adults would tell me. So of course I went to the kids and asked the kids because they were still holding their black feathers. Um, and they said the Crow Man left them that. The Crow Man came to town. He left us these. They say, have you ever seen the Crow Man, mister? I said, no, I've never heard of the Crow Man. Never seen the Crow Man before. Um, and I remember what that little girl looked up at me and told me. It was awesome in her little white dress. She said, the Crow Man takes care of us. And that's what sparked my interest into learning more about the Crow Man. Um, that was the beginning of my journey to my research journey. and learn more about the Crow Man, and then finding out the things that were happening in that town, and that the origins of the Crow Man, where it happened at. Um, the little girl looking at me. I'm getting goosebumps thinking about it because I have her voice in my head right now. For her big smile, she was missing a few teeth because, of course, she lost her baby teeth. She said he takes care of us. Crowman takes care of us. And of course, her grandma came and grabbed her and was shush, stop bothering that man. And the grandmother invited me over to eat Sunday with him, and of course I went to eat because I would take a free meal wherever I could at that time in my life. If someone was inviting me to their house to eat, of course I went to the house to eat. Um, and I would sit on the porch with all the older people, the older men, and they would tell their stories. And they start talking about the Crow Man. That the old Crow Man came to visit, and that he was here teaching some lessons. They wouldn't tell me a lot about him, but they just from their conversations, I started picking up bits and pieces of where to start my investigation and start to look for him at. And of course, I came to my conclusion about how he came into being once I discovered where I believe he was born at. But in my research and my travels, I found that the Crow Man has visited many towns in the South. I haven't, the furthest north I've heard tales from, believe it or not, um, were in 2019 on the border between Washington State and Oregon. That the Crow Man came to visit people there. I never got all the details. They weren't very forthcoming with information when I stuck my nose into it to learn more about it. But I never had heard of him going that far north before. But it made sense. It made sense because there was a lot of things going on in a lot of those border towns during that time. Um, it made sense why he would show up there. Well, guys, does anybody have any questions? We have a few minutes. Anybody have a question or a comment? If not, I want to thank everybody for coming out tonight. I hope you learned a little bit. I do strongly advise you not to go out and be a part of or be aware of any great acts of evil, because you never know what may be paying attention to those who enacted it or those who witnessed it and did nothing about it. Because you may get a visit from something like the Crow Man to your house. And that would not be good. That would not be good whatsoever. If you like what you heard tonight, please smash the like button. If you don't already subscribe, please subscribe. If you're on Twitter, I know I've been very quiet on Twitter because I'm taking care of some personal problems right now of a paranormal nature right now in my life. It's keeping me offline a great deal, but I do feel obligated to come on and share my stories. I always will with my audience, my friends. But if you like, you can follow me on Twitter, Mike the Naked Bigfoot, if you want to Google me. I do show up in Google. I'm Voodoo3 on Twitter, or you can go and look up Mike the Naked Bigfoot on Twitter. It's easy to find me. You can follow. I always follow back. If I forget to, just remind me and I will do it. Had a good night, a good time telling this story tonight of one of the lesser known paranormal critters that are out there one of the more fascinating ones. Again, thanks for joining our paranormal fireside chat with the Naked Bigfoot. I hope everybody has an awesome night or an awesome day, depending on what time you view this. And join me for my next episode. I'm sure it'll be just as entertaining and probably just as controversial. Have a great night, all. Thanks again.